Hello, folks online. Can you hear us, Antti and Sophia, for example?
Yes.
Yes.
Can hear you as well.
We can both see you and hear you.
That's perfect. Perfect. Yes. And in the future, you will probably be able to touch us as well. Virtually. Good. I suggest that why don't we actually get going with this. So warm welcome to everybody. Warm welcome to Paolo Pasimeni to this keynote lecture of the winter semester. This is a special occasion to have you here to speak to us. I'll introduce you in just a moment, but just to set the scene a little bit here. So we are here in the onset of the academic winter season, and we have two groups of students. Seems to have also a little bit set around the same groups within the classroom. So warm welcome to the Internal Market and Competition Law group from the Euromaster. So very much down your alley in terms of looking into the functioning of the EU's internal market, and then a practical look into our law students who are looking into the internal market through the prism of EU's policies, specifically looking currently into sustainability policies and textiles policies, and framing and having this internal market lecture as the broad framework of operation for that. And indeed, it's a broad framework for all of us in Europe, a framework that is crucial for Europe, that's been a seminal part of Europe from the very beginning. But strangely enough, although having been seminal, somehow is not really on the very forefront of the discussions of them. So Paolo thinks, I think, many people think that it should be more so. So it's great to use all the opportunities to actually remind us of this fact of what the internal market in the history of the EU is in fact all about, what it has been, how it has evolved, and what we are focusing on today, specifically where we are today and how we're portraying that to the future, how do the prospects of the internal market look like? And what better way to do this than have the privilege of Paolo Pasimeni, who is the Deputy Chief Economist in DG GROW, to do this. Paolo just organized a major research conference on this topic with leading scholars from all around the world, looking into the internal market in many ways. So I think we'll be able to benefit from some of the insights learned from there. But Paolo, of course, in his own work, also in the Commission, as an economist looking into this, will have a lot of interesting insights to offer us. Where are we currently, and where are we headed in this journey? I don't think I will take more of your time. You, as many of your classes, time now in the introduction. Just want to welcome you and encourage you also to actively engage in a discussion. This is really, and Paolo is very happy to then, after the main part of the presentation, to discuss these issues and kind of engage also in an interaction with you and think together about some of the challenges and opportunities that we are seeing there, whether from the viewpoint of textiles specifically, or more broadly speaking, from the developments at large. So thanks so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
And thanks so much for coming. And I'll sit over there to enjoy and be able to watch you. Let me just turn on your
Thank you for the introduction, Harry, and thank you all for being here. As Harry said, well, I have prepared a slide deck about the single market and various aspects of the single market, but I think it would be more interesting if at any point you have any question and we start talking about it, and I will try to address your questions. So I will follow my presentation, but I mean, just in case we do not have necessarily to go through all the slides, if you have other questions and you want to address other topics, of course, provided if I am able to address the questions that you may have. As Harry said, I work in the European Commission in the Directorate General who is in charge of the single market and of industrial policy. I am the deputy chief economist there. But let's say I've been in this place for the past 5 years, but for the previous 13 years, I've been in other departments of the Commission, always dealing with economic analysis, so from macroeconomic policies and the euro area in particular, to the EU budget, to labor markets, and various parts of cohesion policy and structural funds. So that's my background. I'm a macroeconomist as background. And yes, and I focus my economic analysis on the single market. Okay, perfect. So, as Harry said, I think, and many people think, that the single market is somehow, there is a kind of a paradox between the political relevance of the single market and the space it has in the academic research, at least after it was established. Because before its establishment, there was a proliferation of analysis, economic analysis, legal analysis, political sciences, about the creation of the European single market. After that, it somehow taken for granted. And there is little analysis which is explicitly conceived with the goal of studying the single market. I speak, let's say, mainly about my field of expertise, which is economics. I don't know if it's the same in, law, political science, but this was really the surprise that I got maybe a few years ago when I started to deepen the work on the single market. And then for this reason, we have developed some initiatives, like we have created a working paper series dedicated to the single market, which is now in its beginning its third year. And I have organized two research conferences precisely on the single market. The last one was last week. Based also on the insights that we got from that work and that research, I will also present you something at the very end of the presentation. Now, why I think the single market is important and deserves a more prominent role in economic analysis, and also in general in the analysis of EU policies and European affairs. Because if you think about it, I mean, everything, the major initiative, the major policies that have created in the process of European integration, they all pivot around this idea of a common market. First of all, the idea of a common market was already the very beginning of the process. If you think of the very conception of in the 50s of a common area where trade could be facilitated compared to what was already happening with the rest of the world. If you think of the so-called European Economic Community established with the Treaty of Rome in 1957, and if you think already, even before at the Carbon and Steel Community, that was already a first attempt of pulling together some resources in a common pot, in a common market. Then the idea of a common market grew during the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, and it led to the official establishment of the single market on the 1st of January 1993. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the creation of the single market is not a kind of clear-cut discontinuity with what was happening until the end of December 1992. It's a work in progress, and it has always been like that. It is very different, for instance, from the creation of the Economic and Monetary Union, because there, on the 1st of January 1999, when the exchange rate were fixed, that created a clear discontinuity in the function of the economy. The single market is not like that. For instance, you have countries who then join the EU, but even before joining the EU, through the first association agreements, they already had initiated this process of joining a common market with the EU member state. And the same is happening today with countries who are not in the EU, who are not officially in the single market, but which have an association agreement, and so they are part of this process of removing barriers to trade in goods and services with the single market. Then, if you think of the other major policies of the European Union, think of competition policy. Competition policy was created precisely with the clearly stated objective of making the single market, the common market, function, so to facilitate the functioning of the single market. That's why we have a competition policy. If you think of one of the oldest policy, the agricultural policy. The agricultural policy is the first and probably the most complete example of the creation of a single market. If you think of the cohesion policy was really one of the main desires that Jacques Delors had to complement the creation of the single market, because they knew that by creating a single market, you may easily disrupt some economic and social and territorial equilibria, and you needed something to compensate that disruption, and that's why they created cohesion policy. And also, this we will see more in detail from a macroeconomic point of view. The creation of the monetary union was justified as a means to facilitate the functioning of the single market. So that's why I say that the whole process of European integration basically pivots around the idea of a single common market. Now, let's start with a few definitions that you probably know. The single market refers to the European Union as one territory without internal borders or other regulatory obstacles to free movement. Free movement of what? We have the definition of 4 channels. So free movement of people, free movement of capital, of goods, and of services. So this is, let's say, the idea of a common internal market in the EU. Of course, this is based on the progressive establishment of mutual recognition that any product lawfully sold in one country can be sold in all others. Now, we take for granted that this is what defines a common market. But if you think of the biggest single market in the world, which is the United States, you may think that this applies fully to the United States. It's absolutely not the case. If you've ever tried to travel from I don't remember which neighbor state with California, and bring some I don't know, fruits and vegetables or meat or eggs to California, then you cannot. If you think of other products that are produced with some standards in one state in the United States and cannot be brought and sold in another state, then you have an idea of how fragmented in general a single market can be, even in a political union, economic union like the United States. So in the EU, there is this idea of a mutual recognition, and any product lawfully sold in one country can be sold in others. Now, for goods, it's easy. For services, it's a bit more difficult. For people, it's even more difficult. For capital, the movement of capital, basically through the creation of the monetary union, was more or less guaranteed. Although there are, of course, then in the financial sector, still a lot of there is some fragmentation, but not in the free movement of capital. Now, beyond the economic implication, it has also helped to create a more united Europe. The idea is that by deepening trade and economic relations, you also deepen economic and political relations. By providing a common set of laws and regulation, the single market has helped to create a more integrated Europe and has allowed the EU to become a more powerful political and economic bloc in the world. Now, this is, of course, something that we like to say and to claim. I think it is true, but there is, of course, there are some the qualification that we can make to this. For instance, while creating more integration, the single market is also a disruptive force that may create and increase divergences. The two go hand in hand, and that's why Delors wanted a policy to compensate for these, say, negative spillovers for the single market. Something which is, I think, often underestimated is the third point. For those of you who are familiar with the external relation policies of the European Union, you may have noticed that a union that doesn't have an army, that doesn't have, let's say, a proper, sizable budget compared, I don't know, to the federal budget of the United States or to the national budget of China or Russia or the other major economies in the world. A union that doesn't have a lot of competencies because they remain at the United States has nevertheless an important asset, and this asset is the single market. And I like to quote something that Michel Barnier said recently. Michel Barnier has been twice commissioner, and he has also been a minister of foreign affairs, and he has been the chief negotiator of Brexit. So he knows a little bit the external relations of the union and also the single market, having been the commissioner responsible for the single market in the past. He recently, in an interview, he declared the following sentence that for me is enlightening. He said, the only reason why the president of the United States and the president of China respect the EU, the only reason is the single market. Without the single market, they wouldn't need really to take the EU into account. And that's why, because the only asset of the EU external relation policy is to calibrate
just when you give it a bit of time.
Okay, just to have a clear picture. two states are, of course, the European Union. Then you have the free trade area, which includes Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Norway and Iceland. And then you have non-EU states with stabilization and association agreement. The orange one are non-EU state with a deep and comprehensive free trade area agreement. And then you have non-EU countries with a bilateral custom union arrangement, the largest of which is Turkey. Now it's important, okay, as a sideline that some of these countries are already negotiating the accession. But as I said at the beginning, what matters for the single market is really the process of progressive integration with our internal market. And this is already happening in these countries to different extent.
Let's see if we just. You tried the arrow button?
Yes.
It's just very slow. Change.
So, well, this just, I've already touched upon this, but I would just like to be more precise in saying that removing tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade, fostering cross-border capital flows and supporting people's mobility were all the key decisions, and they were taken at the same time. And there was a strong political will to have the four freedoms together. And an effect of this will to keep these four freedoms together was then evident during the Brexit negotiations. Because the Brexit negotiation, actually, the UK would have accepted, to some extent, some continuation of the free trade in goods, services, and capital movement, but sacrificing, if the EU had been willing to sacrifice the free movement of people with the UK. So the fact that we wanted to keep the four freedoms together was a very important decision at the beginning, and it still is. And it was also a major issue in the Brexit negotiation. Now, as I said at the beginning, when you create progressively an economic integration among economies that used to be somehow separated, you create some spillovers, earthquakes in some cases, which imply that the conduct of the economic policy in one country becomes necessarily linked to the conduct of macroeconomic policies in the other countries. So it's very difficult once you integrate, the more you integrate into a common market, it's really difficult to conduct the economic policy according to one country's own preference. That's in general, that happens in general, but much more in the EU single market because the level of integration is much higher. So the optimal mix of macroeconomic policies could no longer be determined by each country independently. Now, because of this understanding, already before the creation of the single market and at the very beginning, the European heads of states and government and the European Commission decided to launch in parallel the process of the economic and monetary union, which was a very peculiar arrangement because it was the first time in history in which a group of countries gave up their competences on monetary policies but they kept the competencies, exclusive competence on fiscal policy. And that created a unique case, an unprecedented decoupling, like Charles Goodhart defined it at the time, between monetary and fiscal policy. At the time, the creation of the monetary union, as I said at the beginning, was justified as a means to facilitate the functioning of the single market. Now, as I said before, working on the single market, I've been working for almost a decade on the architecture of the monetary union. And the conclusion is that we now say that we need a better functioning single market to make the monetary union more let's say, sustainable and function better. So the reverse of it. But it's clear that the two projects are very, very strictly linked and interdependent, I would say. In terms of economic consequences, in an integrated and well-functioning common market, factors of production, capital and labor, but also technology, can be reallocated more easily, and prices can be more flexible, increasing the resilience of the economy. Now, this is in principle. A common market stimulates competition. That's clear because you have more competitors fishing in the same pot. Trade, efficiency, and helps cut prices. And that's an effect that we have had for decades. A large domestic market at the same time, and this is an important aspect, sometimes underestimated of the single market, shields the domestic firms from external turbulences, from global crises. Why? Because if you have a large domestic market and you have a collapse in the Chinese economy, then you can rely on your domestic market or to sell your production. While if you don't have, if you have a very small domestic market, this effect is really minimal. You have, in other words, you have a large reserve of domestic demand. As I said, the management of all this is more difficult than within a single country. Within a single country. Now, let's talk a little bit about the size and the structure of the single market. As I said at the beginning, the EU single market is one of the largest in the world. You can think of three main markets in the world: United States, China, and the EU single. You see here that, where is it? Yeah. The light blue box is the United Kingdom. Red is the rest is the EU, United States, and China. It depends on how you measure it. If you measure in purchasing power parities, then we have roughly the same size as the United States. If you measure in the current US dollar, then the United States is much bigger. But the main information to retain from this is that the European single market is one of the three largest in the world. That's why it's the main asset of our foreign policy. In concrete terms, a few numbers: it has 440 million consumers, 23 million businesses, which employ more or less 128 million people. It represents about 16% of the world's GDP. Brexit implied a loss of 15%, which is this that we saw in the previous slide, the light blue box. That's the size of the United Kingdom. And EU trade represents 31% of world's trade. 18% is the external trade with the rest of the world. 13%, well, sorry, no, 18% is our trade within our border, and 13% the extra EU trade. In terms of structure, here I kept the Okay, just to give an idea of the size, this is, of course, something very easy, probably well known, the size of each economy. This is probably less well known, which is the size of the sectors that compose the single market in terms of value added. Of course, wholesale and retail, real estate, and the business sector services are the three largest sectors of our economy. Then we have human health and social work, public administration, construction, transportation, financial insurance, and education, but also quite large sectors. Now, they are large compared to others, but if you look in terms of productivity, for instance, some smaller sectors are more productive. It's a typical case of the IT sector, information, communication, and technology. This is the structure of the single market, let's say, at a very, very superficial and first glance. Now, an important aspect of the single market is the difference between integration in trading goods and in trading services. As you probably know, trading goods is much easier than trading services. It has always been like that, and it is also like that in the single market. And in fact, the level of intensity of cross-border trade in goods is much higher than the intensity of cross-border trade in services. Now, an important change can be represented by digitalization. Why? Because to the extent that digitalization becomes more pervasive, more and more services can be provided cross-border. So trading services in this sense can increase. It will not increase because of a legal decision, the Bolkestein Directive. It will increase because of technology. And this is already happening. If that happens, if that continues, that can have a disruptive effect on integration set. But this integration, of course, will not be limited to the single market. Because, for instance, if you consider, let's say, education as a service, in the past, you could only provide this service in presence, so to people that were attending class. Now you can do it, and we do it more and more often online. This means that this can be done cross-border, but cross-border not necessarily within the single market, but also around the globe. So that's something that can disrupt completely the idea that we have trading services. And it's a completely new area to study and to explore. And there are a few economists already starting looking at that. But now let's come back to the present situation. And we see that almost 38% of the overall value added embedded in the demand of manufacturing industry in the EU is generated by services. So the interlink between services and goods and manufacturing is becoming more and more important. Think again, an example, the car industry. The car industry, it requires more and more services content in the production of a unit than it used to do in the past. And this is increasing the value added embedded in the demand of manufacturing that is generated by services. Services value added ranges between 22% and 44%, depending on the sectors. The one sectors in which it accounts for a lower share are mining, quarrying, non-energy producing products. Those in which services accounts for most of the value added are food products, beverages, and tobacco. Services provide the highest share of value added in manufacturing sector and wholesale and retail, followed by professional, scientific, and technical activities and administrative and support services. More in concrete terms and with some numbers attached. This is the share of services value added in final demand for total manufacturing in the EU. So you see that retail and wholesale services account for more than 11% of the total value added produced by the manufacturing, so by the industry, and so on. Scientific services account for 5.4%, administrative services, financial, transport, and so on. This is important to keep in mind because when we see the data about trade in goods and trade in services, somehow we neglect the relevance of the service content of value added produced by the industry. This is a very complicated chart to show and to explain because it is the product of a huge analysis that we did 3 or 4 years ago. Basically, this is the classification of the whole economy in the single market into the main sectors. For every sector, we have calculated how much. Let's take just say one horizontal bar. I don't know, textile here, textiles here on the supply side. So only these lines means it's the product of the following calculations. So we took all the countries of the EU. We measured how much the production in these sectors, textiles, done by one country was due to inputs, intermediate inputs, coming from third countries, China, coming from another EU country, or coming from the domestic sector, other companies providing intermediate input within that country. By adding up and calculating the average of all these data in each sector for all the 27 EU member states, then we found those shares. So the blue one is the share of the single market. So how much the textile sector in the EU relies on inputs provided by the single market. On the demand side, that bar measures how much the production realized by the production by the countries in the EU single market is sold to other countries within the single market, and that's the blue line. Or it is sold to the rest of the world, China, United States, or it is sold within the national borders of each country. So that's what these bars tell us. And you can see that in some sectors, the relevance of the domestic economy is, of course, very large. And these are typical services sectors, because services are mainly considered to be less tradable. The more you move towards manufacturing, agriculture manufacturing, the more you trade, the more the relevance of the cross-border trade increases. Then what is important is the difference between cross-border within the single market and cross-border with the rest of the world. This is important. And you see that in some sectors, we rely more on the rest of the world than on the single market, while in others, we rely more on the single market than on the rest of the world. If I'm not wrong, one of the sectors in which we rely the most on the single market is motor vehicles, machinery and equipment. Those are the sectors in which really the single market represents the most important market. Sorry for that. Most important market. Now, I replicated that analysis not for sectors but for countries. So for countries, you can see, and this is quite expected, that the larger the economy, the domestic economy, the lower the need for external trade. But this is basic trade economics, with some exceptions. For instance, the largest economy is Germany, which should be here, but it's here, which means that Germany trades more than its size would suggest. On the other side, you have Greece and Finland, who, being relatively smaller in size, nevertheless, they rely much more than their size would suggest on the domestic economy. They're more domestic oriented than their size would suggest. In this analysis, I included the United Kingdom because it's quite interesting to see that the United Kingdom was probably, was the country relying the least on the single market in terms of goods and services. Mainly goods, sorry. Because for services, the UK was relying a lot on this. Then we did a kind of an attempt, a theoretical attempt to, and we matched this ranking with the contributions or net contribution or net benefit to the EU budget. You see, are the countries that rely the most on the single market those who maybe pay more to the EU budget or vice versa? There is no very strong correlation, as you can see. Also because the net balance to the budget is somehow capped. We know that no country pays more than 0.3 or 0.4, 0.35, 0.4% of its GDP in net terms to the budget. This is an average of the most recent 5 years. So here you have the net payers, the net beneficiaries, but what is interesting is this dimension, so the reliance on the single market. So you see, Luxembourg is the country relying the most on the single market. Hungary is the one that at the same time has a huge reliance on the single market and a very positive balance vis-a-vis the budget. On the opposite corner, you find the UK. Then we can, well, if you have questions on this first part, just ask. Otherwise,
Just an observation, maybe more than a question. I was wondering, because part of the Brexit package, like you said, was exactly the fact that the freedoms were bundled together.
Yeah.
And the idea was that the internal market is precious to the UK and they don't want to give it away. But then we see that it's actually the least dependent on the internal market. That's a bit surprising to see them so low in that scale.
Yes, well, on one side, the UK is a large domestic market, like Italy, France, or Germany. So no surprise that it's, let's say, in that group. But within that group, yes, it's a surprise that it was.
And it gives the impression that it's outward looking and exporting or not, but it's maybe much less than.
Because it's mainly capital.
Right.
So the UK is the one of the largest, London is one of the largest financial center of the world, like New York. And that's what really makes the openness of the UK.
Mm.
For the rest, the UK has always had a very large trade deficit with the rest of the EU. To the point that in 2016, when the Brexit referendum took place, I remember we looked at the figures, and in absolute terms, not in relative terms, but in absolute terms, the UK was the country in the world, the second country in the world that had the largest trade deficit with the rest of the EU after the United States. But of course, the two sides are not comparable. But still, the trade deficit that the UK had this means that the UK was importing way more than it was exporting to us. It was importing a lot. And something that, no, I don't have the slide here today, but something that some British economists at the London School of Economics have showed last year is that 2 years ago, actually, they made this paper, that after Brexit, there has been a significant adjustment in the imports from UK imports from the EU have been declining a lot, but not so much the export. Basically, they have somehow adjusted this trade deficit, not completely, I think, because there is still some deficit, but it's clear that the hit, Brexit has hit more the import side than the export side for the UK, which is consistent with the anecdotal evidence of some products being unavailable in the UK. I don't know if there are other questions. Okay, we move on. Integration. So integration, as I said, in labor, capital, trade, and goods and services. Here we talked a little bit with some data. This is an exercise that we are refining, and I will show later some figures. The level of labor mobility in the EU, the blue lines, and in the euro area, the lines and the orange line. The blue lines refer to the EU, and this to the euro area. The dark lines refer to share of workers from EU or euro area countries. The lighter lines refer to the share of workers coming from non-EU or non-euro area. So you see that at the level of the single market, more or less, there is a balance between the share of workers who work in a country and come from other countries within the single market, and the share of workers that work in a country and come from outside the EU. When we look at the euro area, the difference is really huge. That difference, in the sense that in euro area countries, the share of workers coming from other euro area countries is very low compared to the share of workers coming from non-euro area countries. The reason why there is this big gap in the euro area but not in the EU is explained by the inward, and this is until 2018, so it includes the UK. The inward flows to the UK, and the outward flows from, which is a non-euro area country, and the outward flows from non-euro area countries such as Romania, Bulgaria, Poland. That's what explains this difference. But in any case, the trend in labor mobility is increasing. The same is for capital. I mean, capital movement, as we said, have increased a lot. In particular, after the various regulations that accompany the creation of the monetary union, at the end of the 90s, 99, 98, 97. And that's how the trend in capital mobility is increasing. Trading goods. We will see this better in detail later. But we see an important, a constant increasing trend in trading goods within the single market. Again, the red lines represent the euro area, with two major shocks. One is the global financial crisis. The other one was COVID. Trading services has also progressed, I'll say, steadily for the 2 decades for which we have data. Now, can we say that these proves that the single market has generated integration? So the size of the flows along the 4 dimensions has increased over time. But also the size of the economy has increased over time. The size of the EU economy and the size of the world economy. So that's not enough to say that has generated integration. Now, a typical way is to measure these trends in relation to the dimension of the economy. So as a share of GDP or as a share of population in the case of labor mobility. And even with this measure, we see an increasing trend. But this is not enough, some argue. A few years ago, when we were using these figures, some colleagues said, okay, but that's not enough because the world during these 2 decades or 3 decades of single market was undergoing an overall process of globalization. So trade was increasing, cross-border trade was increasing between any pair of countries that you could consider, Australia and Canada, China and Mexico. So it was also increasing. So a good counterfactual is to measure the integration within the single market in relation to global integration of the same countries belonging to the EU with the rest of the world. Now I try to explain this a bit more clearly. Basically, you can take the amount of cross-border trade that takes place in a given year within the single market, and you divide it by the cross-border trade that is taking place between every country in the single market, Belgium, Czech Republic, Portugal, whatever, with the rest of the world. So you divide these 2 amounts and you have a true counterfactual. So what is the integration within the single market compared with the integration that is happening between our countries and the rest of the world? That's the idea. Now, these are the first results of a long-term project that we started more than 4 years ago to track these flows, taking time at least until the Single European Act of 1986, where the idea of the single market was put forward, if possible, until 1957, the Treaty of Rome. So we have now complete and verified all the series only for trading goods, starting in 1948, so right after World War II. We will do the same for the trading services in goods and the free movement of people. But of course, I cannot yet show the series because we have to verify all the batch. I mean, these lines are built by adding up all the bilateral flows. So the flow between Belgium and Portugal in any given year. And also the flows between Belgium and the rest of the world in any given year. by then summing up the flows between Belgium and the other 26, and the flows of all the 27 with the rest of the world. The ratio that you get is this line. We did this for the import and for the exports. So the import are the blue line, the export are the red line. Now, we are doing this for very different groups of countries, because one group is the EU 27 in a fixed composition, basically considering the 27 member states that today compose the EU as if they were a single entity already in 1948. Of course, there are some countries that at the time didn't exist. Some countries, and for instance, for those countries that have no data, in particular the Baltic republics. But for instance, other countries, for Czech Republic and Slovakia, you had data of Czechoslovakia, so you could really track those data till 1948. And we did this for the EU 27 aggregate. We have done it for the EU 28 aggregate, because until 2020, the UK was part. So just to look at this, we have done this for the EU in a moving composition. So starting from 0 country here, 6 countries in 1956, then 9, then 12, then 15, then 25, 27, 28, 27 again. So, and we have done that also. And the same thing we have done for the euro area. So we have done for the euro area 12, which are the 12 original countries joining the monetary union. We have done for the euro area 20, which is the current group. And we have done for the euro area in moving composition. Of course, starting in 99, because before 99, there was no euro. Now, so I show here only 2 groups, which are, let's say, the 2 ones for which we have already more information, and which are the ones that I think are more meaningful, because by keeping a constant composition, then you can really see how trade within those countries has changed, has evolved with the establishment of the single market or with other major events, crises and so on. So on the left side, you have the whole EU 27. What you can see is that for most, after the 60s, from the 60s onwards, the 2 lines are above 1. And this is the most important information. Because if they are above 1, it means that the ratio, the numerator is higher than the denominator. And remember that the numerator of this ratio is trade within the single market. The denominator is trade with the rest of the world. So we are more integrated within the single market than we are with the rest of the world when we talk about trading goods. And when I say we, I'm referring here to the single market. Now, we see a relevant decrease, a sizable decrease, in particular in imports during the 80s, which was then followed by a sharp increase in this integration. And this is exactly the process of progressive creation integration within the single market, the creation of the single market. That clearly led to a faster trade integration among us than what was happening in any case in the rest of the world. Trade integration within our borders was really faster during the 90s at the beginning of the creation of the single market. And then the fact that the line is stable, more or less, means not that the level of trade is stable, that the speed of integration within our borders is the same as the speed of integration that is taking place around the world through the process of globalization. It's interesting what happens in the latest 2 years. 21, 22, with slower integration in import and stronger in export. That's to be seen. Well, I'm very curious to see what happens in the next few years. Yeah. The euro area. The euro area tells us a different story. First of all, the level used to be the level of this ratio. Remember, it's a ratio around 1, which means that integration within the euro area was progressing at the same speed as global integration. Right? We see the same strong increase in the preparation for the single market. But then after the creation of the monetary union, which is here, we don't see a strong impulse to trade integration. And after the great financial crisis, the global financial crisis here, we see a slowdown in comparison to globalization. And this is consistent with the most recent studies on the monetary union that try to measure the trade effect of the monetary union. So the trade effect is stronger because of the single market than because of the monetary union. This is also something that some recent analysis has suggested. And maybe, yes, if you don't, yeah.
Just so the figures, are they cumulative or like each year?
Each year.
Yes, because otherwise it would.
No,
Yeah.
Each year, the ratio between intra and extra for import and for export. For the moment, we have finished the series of trading goods because we managed to go back to 1948. And now we are with services back to 95, hopefully to 79. And capital, I think capital is, for people, maybe we will be able to go back to 1974. Like this six. Yeah. Yes.
Situations highest for goods and services. Is that always the case in terms?
Well, I don't know if the level of integration is higher for goods than for capital. I don't know. Certainly higher than services. Yes, this is always the case because not in internal markets, but in in trade, cross-border trade, because services are less tradable. This may change because of digitalization. But yes, certainly in trade integration is good. In goods is always higher than trade integration in services.
And if you look at the different phases, you said that you were looking at as EU is growing. Do you then see an impact that the newcomers, in a way, bring a boost?
Yes, but then there is the composition effect. Because at the beginning, you are only measuring, let's say, your numerator includes 6.
Yeah.
Then there are 3 countries that move from denominator to the numerator and so on and so forth. So it increases, yes. That's why I prefer the constant composition to show the effect. Okay. Now, precisely because of this process of asking basically the research community to develop studies on the single market, the past couple of weeks, we have got some new insights and new analysis on the single market. One of these was presented last week by the authors of a paper that is forthcoming in our series. They construct a new regional trade data set to basically measure how strong is the border effect. And in trade, you have trade within a single market. and you have a border effect in the sense that the trade between Brussels and Namur, everything else equal, is lower than usually lower on average the trade between Brussels and I don't know, Vienna. Okay, so they did this taking millions of observations of bilateral trade within firms. So I don't know how many million observations they have to do this analysis. So a nice way in which they explained these rise that they did is that they try to measure how wide is the border, in the sense how strong is this border effect within the single market. They find that it's significant. It is still significant. And they also check the determinants of these border effect. The border effect is not something new. It's something that had been already proved in the literature in the past. But they say that they can measure the most significant effect, which are due to language, transport infrastructure, and something that they call values, which is a mix of socioeconomic characteristics of the population of firms that they have used. Yes.
I think when if, for example, some requirements for the language are the same, there's a tendency to prefer interest rate, I think, for example, between Germany and Austria, even in the provision of services, even if they can, a German company provide services in Austria, there's going to be still a preference to in the local market.
Yes.
Maybe an Austrian citizen will prefer the same service, but from a Austria.
Yes. This was in fact proved by a paper that we had in our conference last year by some colleagues from the European Central Bank, precisely the case between Austria and Bavaria. But there is a border effect that doesn't depend on language. So there is other factors, but also, and that refers to the next study that I will show. So this tells us in policy, I mean, the policy implication is that in the single market, there is room for improvement. Transport infrastructure, mainly, but some barriers will always remain. So, and this is a question that someone asked about the limits to the single market. Which are the limits to trade integration in the same thing? We don't know. And precisely something that relates to the question that you asked, but that it was analyzed only in the case of public procurement, is this so-called local bias. So the fact that in public procurement, the public authority often prefers, everything else equal, a local offer to a foreign offer. And this effect, they studied by using 1 million procurement contracts awarded in France and Spain, to say to what extent the home bias follows the government's geographical scope. So they find a strong evidence of this national bias at national, but also at local level. And this explains a big part of the high local concentration in procurement. And it's an important, let's say, finding to understand the procurement market integration in the EU and the spatial distribution of economic activity. Another interesting, probably one of the most interesting works that I've seen so far on the single market is a work in progress by two of the best trade economists in the world, who are Lionel Fontanier and Yoto Yotov. Lionel is an important trade economist who's also an advisor to several governments and international institutions, and he's based in Paris, and he is famous for his work on trade, assessing trade, bilateral trade and multilateral trade. And Yoto Yotov is one of the father or the main expert on gravity models of trade. So they were two fellows of DigiGrow this year. We have been working with them. And this is a paper that they are writing precisely after this work they have done with us during this year. So they basically try to assess in a theoretical model, in a theoretical framework, but testing with empirical data, the balance between cost reduction and risk reduction in trade of the EU with the rest of the world. In particular, they simulate two scenarios. One, which is the progressive decoupling from Russia. So the EU trades less with Russia. The other one is the progressive decoupling from China. So the EU trades less with China. What they find is that, of course, there is a cost, which is these red dots. There's a cost in trading less with some partners, but this cost can be offset by the benefits that we get from trading among us in the single market. And this is something interesting. Of course, it's a theoretical exercise. The policy recommendation is that further single market integration can compensate for the losses in the decoupling in trade with partners. But still, it's a very interesting attempt that I have not seen before. Then another interesting piece of work that we did, this was done in-house, is the work on foreign dependencies, so-called strategic dependencies. In 21, the Commission proposed an assessment of which are the main trade dependencies that we have vis-à-vis the rest of the world. And last year, the Commission has updated this analysis, looking at several criteria. I mean, how to define the dependence. First of all, look at products that refer to strategic sectors. Check for this product in which cases the imports from non-EU countries originate from less than 3 countries, which means that the supply side is very concentrated and it's outside our single market. Check when imports from non-EU countries are at least half of the total EU imports in that product, and if they are higher than the total exports. So in those cases, this is the definition that we have used to define, well, 3 colleagues of mine, actually, to define the strategic dependencies. This way, 204 products have been classified as strong dependencies, mainly in energy-intensive industries, in energy and renewables, in digital and in electronics, and in health. In these sectors, we have quite a number of products in which we face this strategic dependency. Now, when you look at the potential for substitutability, in the sense you need this product for a strategic product in a strategic sector, we know we don't have. Are these products, let's say, concentrated in some place? Yes. In those cases, we also define the so-called single point of failures, choke points. And then let's say the bottom line of this analysis is that most of these dependencies originate from China. So our main source of dependence in some strategic sectors comes from China. Another interesting work is the so-called, well, an attempt to measure the so-called Brussels effect. I don't know if you are familiar with the Brussels effect. Okay, so no need to explain. This colleague of mine, basically they measured they tried to assess by analyzing more than 5,400,000 something regulations around the world, the probability of a third country adopting regulations similar to what the EU has adopted.
5 million, you said.
Yeah, 5 million for
Regulations.
100,000 something. Yeah, a huge database originally coming from UNCTAD, I think, that then they split to have more detailed information. Basically, the analysis is the EU approves a new regulation in the field of protection of health, safety, and environment. Does any other country in the world follows because they want to access our single market? So that's the question. Of course, to do that, they have not only to control, I mean, to find the information about the adoption of regulation after the EU has adopted a similar one, but also control for all possible confounding factors from economic conditions, trends, political events. So they control for everything in a careful econometric treatment. And they find that this probability is actually significant. So there is a positive and significant coefficient and probability that the rest of the world adopts a similar regulation to the EU after the EU has changed something in its internal. And this is the proof of the quantification of the Brussels effect. Now, this probability, of course, is very small. So it is significant, it is small. Then what we ask is, does it happen also in the case of the United States and of China? So when the United States change regulation, so the rest of the world follows to access that market. And the same for China. And the answer is no. Well, there is a small effect, but the effect of what happens with the EU regulation is the double of what happens in the case of the United States or China. So this Brussels effect is small, but exists. And it's the double of what we could imagine calling a Washington effect or a Beijing effect. Of course, this is limited to some to what was measured, which is health and safety regulation. I guess that in other contexts, the effect may be smaller or even bigger. But this is the very first attempt at quantifying the so-called Brussels effect. And then I will conclude with a few mention to the carbon pricing in a single market and environmental policies within the single market. So first of all, let me introduce, I think, I don't know, are you familiar with the emission trading system? Okay, so I don't need to devote too much time on explaining that this is probably the world's largest greenhouse gas cap and trade scheme, applies to the single market, covers more than 10,000 installations, 600 aircraft operation, and well, the first phase was almost 20 years ago. In the second phase, the first phase was with a significant review of the rules after 2013, and the fourth phase basically started 2-3 years ago. Now, why this is important? Because the ETS basically somehow changes the rules of the game within the single market. And while, let's say, from a political and environmental perspective, this was, of course, something welcome, there were also concerns about this in terms of the effect, the possible negative effect on the competitiveness of the European firms, on the possibility of European firms to profit and to gain from making business in Europe rather than outside. The external side of the ETS is the so-called CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. I don't know if you are familiar with it. It's the it's the idea. I think so, right? In this, so I don't have to explain too much, but basically,
Well, some people have focused their thesis on that, so I think you can explain.
Okay. No. Maybe you can explain better. I'm not an expert on CBAM, but the important thing that I retain from this is that the CBAM operates at our borders. So while the ETS was more inside, the CBAM really defines how the single market relates with the rest of the world in terms of carbon pricing. And that's a big issue, precisely because the single market is at the same time an instrument of foreign policy, but an instrument of domestic economic policy. Okay, so this is the relation, I mean, the free ETS allowance and the CBAM. On the CBAM, maybe I say first something about the ETS. Okay, an interesting work that two colleagues of mine are doing is precisely to try to measure by using a huge data set of firm level data. They match the data set of the European trading system and the data set of Orbis. The first time they matched that to measure at firm level to what extent the ETS scheme was possibly damaging the economic activity of European firms. That was the research question. What they find is that there is little or negative effect of emission performance on economic performance. Negative in the sense that the effect is not, they expected, let's say, a negative effect. That was negative in the sense that the effect is slightly positive. Even in the third phase, the emission trading system doesn't seem to have a negative effect on the participating industrial firms. A potential explanation is that firms have adapted to the rising carbon costs rather than relocated outside the EU. Of course, there is a need to explore this mechanism, but the result seems quite robust. So there seems to be a case for the, let's say, green transition of firms, in the sense that if you accept the cost of producing differently, you may increase your productivity and over time become more successful. This effect is small, let's not overestimate it, but it's significant. In the case of the CBAM, okay, I don't have here the slide of the CBAM. In the case of the CBAM, the economic question is about what happens with the rest of the world. Because the CBAM functions in the sense that it guarantees that whatever is sold, or it should guarantee that whatever is sold within the single market is produced with the same standards. If not, it is subject to an adjustment. So, and that, in theory, I think also in practice, should work. What is the big problem of the CBAM for the European firms? Is that our internal market is not the whole market of the world. What happens? This is what, let's say, the concern, the economic concerns are. What happens to European firms that produce according to our higher environmental standards when they have to sell their production abroad? When they have to sell their production abroad, they are at a competitive disadvantage. That's why they claim that they want export subsidies. they say, given that because of CBAM and the environmental regulation at home, we produce with higher environmental standards, so with higher costs, we will lose export markets. So they ask for export subsidies. That's an option. Another option would be reducing the environmental standards in the single market that we don't want to do, of course. Another option is making the other major markets in the world follow similar standards. And this is, for instance, the discussion with the United States, because if the EU single market and the American single internal market, they agree on similar standards, that's a big part of the world market. Then it becomes difficult for the rest of the world to produce in a way that excludes those firms from the largest markets of the world. So this is the big open economic question about CBAM, to which we don't have an answer. But we had, I missed that slide. We had an interesting contribution by some authors who say that rather than the CBAM, they propose a so-called LBAM, which is leakages border adjustment mechanism. Basically, they say rather than using this scheme, we could raise the import tariffs to everybody in the rest of the world. We raise import tariffs, we protect our market, and they also couple that with, in theoretical model, with export subsidies, which of course, that's an option that may, say, support the possible loss of competitiveness in export markets of European firms, but I think it may also trigger second round reactions and retaliation measures which in the end becomes inefficient without ensuring the same environmental standards that CBAM ensures. So this is the open question in terms of single market and environmental policy.
But you mentioned that for ETS as such, the impacts were not negative.
No, exactly. But that's the important thing. CBAM is rather new, and the economic effect have to be seen. Given that the ETS is not new, it was possible to, and this work on the alternative to CBAM is a theoretical model. While the work on the ETS could be an empirical work because there are data, and these two colleagues of mine, they took those data, they merged with the other data available at firm level, and they really saw whether there was a negative impact on the economic performance, and there is no such.
But just let's leave the floor to others, but just two comments on that. So CBAM, as far as I understand it, maybe Tony can correct me here, but it's mainly perceived or made as in the external extension of the ETS. So the question would be that if the ETS is not creating a deficit as such, it doesn't mean that one would not need to react to the outside, but perhaps it reduces the worry that it is the ETS in itself is a big competitive disadvantage, which links to I'll add my second point. So Porter, hypothesis from the 1990s, right? You're familiar with the work that he did and claims that exactly that rigorous environmental regulation can actually do exactly what seems to be now here.
Yes, it seems to confirm that hypothesis. But
so maybe sorry to say, so the Michael Porter, the Harvard economist, was claiming in the 1990s already that if companies are subject to rigorous environmental standards, that what in fact happens is that they start to behave in a more diligent way internally, which actually leads to benefits. So it's not creating kind of a race to the cost, but actually leads to a benefit to the company's internal revision of the policy. So he was kind of discrediting this race to the bottom logic. And and this seems to link to that type of logic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although one caveat to this work is that they do this thorough analysis, empirical estimation, and a very good econometric treatment. But the database they use, which is ETS matched with Orbis. Orbis is a firm level database, which is skewed towards large companies.
Right.
So this whole exercise and the result that they will find at the end, should be taken with some caution when talking about the whole economy,
Right.
and in particular small and medium enterprises. Because in the database, which it exists, it's available, that can be matched with ETS, the information is mainly for the large companies,
Right.
medium, large. So what happens to the small companies, we don't know. It's likely that small companies face more difficulties to comply with whatever standard, not necessarily only the environmental, with whatever new regulation. It's easier for a large company to comply with, to study, to understand the new regulation than for small companies. It may be the case, but we can say. You have a question?
Yeah, I was thinking that for this requirements to avoid like this emission, does it have something to do, for example, when you're going to celebrate trade agreements with third countries, like was the case with Mercosur, so the industries they have to adapt in case they want to access the market, and that was used, for example, member states like France made the argument that because they don't fulfill like this criteria or they don't have like the same method, which would not accept the agreement, or can it be used also like from a protectionist perspective?
Yes, indeed, can be used, yes. But then, if you are in a negotiation for a trade agreement, also it's also because you may have an interest in having this agreement. So you want something from that country, and then it's up to the EU, the member state, to decide whether they want to, let's say, be stricter or not on environmental standards because of trading. I don't know. We know that there are some raw materials that the EU doesn't have. Maybe in a bilateral trade agreement with the countries that provides, and it's the unique country that provides those materials, maybe the EU would be willing to compromise on something else. That's also possible. But indeed, this can be used if you have stricter standards, environmental, social, whatever field you want to apply those stricter standards. You can use them also as a protectionist measure to some extent.
Kind of like a technical barrier.
Yes.
Just on that. Industrial and financial, yes, that was the Cameron, the ETS.
Yes, this one, Cameron and Garon.
And what does it mean that it didn't have a negative effect? Does that mean it didn't affect further integration of the single market?
No. No, they study really at firm level the markup that firms are able to get in their operation. And they see whether that was affected by compliance with the environmental standards. Yes, very much.
You think the kind of handicap that the WTO, the kind of gridlock that it's in right now,
Siis löydä yhteyden sinne, missä on tämä.
Joo.